Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with John Ellis, who is an emeritus professor of English at UC Santa Cruz, also the author of a number of books. Most recent book is called The Breakdown of Higher Education: How It Happened, the damage it does, and what can be done. And then you got a couple older books, go way back into the archives. Got this one called Literature Lost, Social Agendas and the Corruption of the Humanities. It's from like 1997, and then this one from, I think, the 80s, Against Deconstruction. Welcome, John.
Well, good to be here with you.
Now, I remember reading this book, Literature Lost, back in the 90s, and it was part of this. There's a whole bunch of books that came out, I guess, beginning with the Closing of the American Mind in the 80s, and they were sort of warning about the problems associated with, I guess, what then was called PC, right? Or race, class, gender ideologies in the humanities, in English and history in particular. And towards the end of the book, I think you kind of ask the question, like, is this a fad, right? Because the humanities are prone to fads, and they come and go. But I think you were a little bit more pessimistic, and you said, hey, this is not like other fads. This is something which looks like it's going to be around for a while. And so this latest book, I think that the terms have shifted, and you talk about identity politics as really the way we would describe this current movement. But it seems like, if anything, it's become more entrenched and has led to a lot of public debate over the merits of the university as they've drifted away from the general culture. And I guess the question I would have for you is, the humanities are, I think a lot of people would say, somewhat become more marginalized. And yet it seems like this whole movement, this trend, which has taken over not just universities, but huge parts of the public dialogue, they came out of a very arcane movement, right? In a remote part of the university. Are literature and English and history, are they really as influential as they seem to be? Or is it just that they are like the canary in the coal mine, right? The place where these early movements kind of gain early traction?
I think that's the last phrase of yours is the point. They were the easiest to take over, basically. And one of the reasons why they were easy was that fads and fashions were very much a part of the humanities. I mean, you're always going from one generation to the next. There was always a new approach. I mean, history changed about 1890, 1900. There was the history as it really was. The Germans, fierce Ideological. By the time you got about 20, 30 years later, people were starting to notice that actually definition of a historical fact was not something that happened. It was something that happened that stood out from among the millions of other things that happened, and that was therefore worth focusing on. So you got stark differences between different generations of scholars in the humanities. And my generation, certainly in German studies, always focused on the question: why are these books that we teach? Why are we teaching them? Why are they worth preserving? Why are they worth the attention of students now? But 20, 30 years before that, you had professors mainly talking about the historical background, the biography, who the poet was, and what sort of personality he was. So, I mean, I moved on from that to this fundamental, what seemed to me more fundamental question: why do these books matter to us? What is it about them that demands our attention hundreds of years after they were written? So, from that point onwards, you got new fads with the psychological approach, the sociological approach, and the deconstructive approach, and so on. So in the humanities, we were very used to someone coming up with a new idea that made it easy to say something new, because there was a whole mode. So you didn't need to really, if you wanted to do the feminist approach to the King Lear or to Hamlet, all you had to do was just focus on the female characters, point out how they were oppressed, or they were downgraded, or they weren't given adequate scope in the plot, and you said something new. It might or might not be central to what the play was really about, but you said something new. So France gave people an automatic way of being original when they weren't really original. I mean, because they were formulas. You could apply that formula to almost anything. So in came the radical politics kind of, the sort of Marxist approach, and it could get by and make quite a lot of achievements before it seemed serious to anyone, because it was just one fad among many. And I felt already in that book, Literature Lost, that this was not one fad among many. This was one fad that was going to take over, squeeze all the others out, and wind up as the only approach that would be allowed. And that is indeed what happened, I think. I mean, so it was, in other words, it made an easier pathway for radical politics to get in, get a foothold. But once it had got that foothold, it's like a cuckoo in a cuckoo chick in a nest. It was going to kick all the other chicks out and be the only one that survived and thrived. And that's in fact what's happened.
But look, I mean, Foucault and Derrida and de Man, I mean, these were not Marxists, right? I mean,
well, that's absolutely true, and that's something that people forget. Towards the end of their career, I mean, they really did take on Marx because they could see which way the wind was blowing. So Derrida, for example, later on in his career, certainly started to talk Marxist, more Marxist than he had. But Derrida's role was really to soften up the ground for the Marxists. I mean, if it takes to mean anything, then the Marxists could come and take over. And in many ways, Marxists were able to take over more easily because the existing state of the humanities was so poor. If text could mean anything, why should you bother with them? Well, the Marxists gave you a reason to bother with them. Their analysis of society mattered. I mean, you agreed with it. It was a substantive, solid approach. It actually meant something. It had an agenda. It had a real shape with a meaning to it. And so to some extent, the radicals were able to come in because, in fact, the existing state was chaos, was meaninglessness. They supplied meaning.
No, I think at the beginning of the book, the Literature Lost book, you said it would be really surprising to humanities scholars in the 50s or 60s if you told them that the purpose of the university was to advance a political agenda, right? And I guess that's because that was the time where McCarthyism, right, was pronounced. We at the University of California, I mean, not we, I wasn't around at the time, but were being asked to sign loyalty pledges and so forth. And then you fast forward. Why do you think that it became acceptable to import politics as perhaps a primary mission of the university?
Well, first of all, I mean, you've got to face the fact that all the professional standards were against that. I mean, the American Association of University Professors had a wonderful statement in 1915 that explicitly said, just keep politics out of the classroom. So the radical politics people had a great problem to overcome. I mean, it was not easy to do what they did. When I started off, which was in the 50s, teaching, you couldn't have got almost anybody to agree to the fact that the purpose of the university was to create social change. I think the crucial thing was this. In the 60s, young people, about a couple of hundred Marxists, that met and they faced up to the fact that they would never in America win an election. That was completely foregone conclusion. So they
So this was the SDS you're talking about, right?
So they asked themselves the question, well, how do we get influence in American society? And the answer was, we infiltrate the universities, we take them over, and we use them to educate young people properly according to our standards. Now, that sounded to me, I mean, I first heard about it, I was around at the time. This was 1962, I think. I'd already been teaching 3 years. I thought this was laughable. I thought these were demented young people, and they couldn't possibly get anywhere with this. I mean, the university was such a bastion of respect for scholarship and truth, and so anti-political at that point, anyway. And part of that was because it was post-World War II. You know, I mean, World War II was a patriotism and pride in this country. It won a glorious victory against tyranny. And you couldn't get anyone in the 1960s to say America was a corrupt society, because it had just pulled off a magnificent victory against one of the most horrendous regimes the world's ever seen. And that was the thing that the radicals were up against. They had a country that had a great deal of confidence in itself, and confidence in its own values, its own system of government. But something happened between 1965 and 1975 that was absolutely crucial. If this thing in that 10 years had not happened, we wouldn't be in where we are today. What it was two things happening at once, and they could not have been. I mean, the concatenation, the connection of the two was lethal. One of them was university expansion. Basically, they came back from the Second World War to begin their family life again. The first thing they did was to have children. So you had a huge boom in the production of babies from 45 to 50. I mean, young men coming back to their wives and their families and starting again and having the families they wanted. So that by 1965, you had this huge increase in young people ready for college. So this produced a massive expansion. In any case, the society was tending towards more people going to college. So if you add that factor to the huge increase in the number of young people, what you had between 1965 and 1975 is you had an increase from public education. You had an increase from 3.8 million students to I think it was 8.2. In other words, more than double. So within 10 years, you had to hire a number of professors that exceeded the number of all the existing professors. So in other words, you had to hire at lightning speed, a huge 5 to 75 as was something else happened. It was not just the decay of this huge university expansion. It was the decay of the Vietnam War and the sudden souring of the younger generation on the society it was part of. So the patriotism of World War II wanes and gives way to a feeling of antagonism towards the government, which was lying to the young generation. You expected the young generation to go fight wars that no one quite understood. So the result was that the campuses from 65 to 75 were hotbeds of radicalism brought on by this disaffection with society among the young. And it was precisely at this time when the students veered, pretty hard left, and they were alienated, basically. It was precisely this time that a huge number of new professors needed to be hired. So there was no way around it. You had to hire those professors from the grad students of those years. But they were mainly left, or not mainly, but vast numbers of them were left radicals. So suddenly, within 10 years, you had the political complexion of the university faculty changed. From traditional pro-learning and scholarship and anti-apolitical, they had changed it to huge numbers of young people coming in whose motives were political and who were vowing to change the society, who felt disaffected from America, wanted to see something different happen. Now, I think that if you had not had the expansion in 65, 75, because most of the same time the Vietnam War disaffection was happening, you could not have had this huge change in the tenor of life on the campuses, because what you'd have had is a small number of radicals, coming in, and they'd have had to adapt to the values of the campuses, which were strongly anti-political and pro scholarship and learning. But when you suddenly have a massive number, it's like you're sort of liking it to D-Day, onto the shores of academia, pile out hundreds of thousands of these new troops, and they overwhelm the defenses of the academy, so that the academy seems unable to say to these people, no, we cannot accept your values, we will not tolerate. It was just too many of them. And it changed overnight, really, the prevailing ethos of the council. But by the end of the 70s, by 1980, the die was cast, and you could see the future coming. There was this intermediate stage where radicalism was a fad, a humanistic fad that allowed people to publish articles on King Leo and Hamlet from that point of view. And my department, literature, certainly by about 1980, a large number of people that I knew to be completely apolitical, they had never had any interest in politics. They were, in fact, publishing stuff that met the new fad. But by about 1985, it became clear that there are a new cadre of people, the people who were going along for the ride had hired the younger colleagues that were for serious. And there was a civil war in my department between when the numbers approached equality, roughly equality. In other words, half of them were real radicals, half of them were fake radicals who were going along because it was the latest fad in the humanities. And that civil war was pretty brutal. I mean, the younger people knew the older ones were phonies. And the older people didn't know what to do about it because they professed the same values as the radicals. So they had nothing to fight back with. So they, in fact, let the march of history continue. The radicals took over. Now, in the humanities departments, in history, English, foreign languages, except Russian, the radicals completely dominate departments. And you can see in the latest surveys of political affiliations of professors in humanities departments that there's barely any right of center professors. They're all left of center.
Well, I mean, does it really make sense to say that the good old days were apolitical, right? I mean, wasn't it just a different sort of politics? I mean, you talk about how, we no longer prepare our students for citizenship, but I mean, that's a form of politics, right? To prepare students for citizenship.
Well, there was always if we go back to 50s, 60s, which I knew pretty well, I was there, there was always going to be a debate between left and right. And in fact, the emphases were about 3-2, left versus right. But everyone accepted the fact that there would be a debate, that there were two sides. I mean, I'm very used to people being hired in departments of sociology, say, like at Santa Cruz, where I am, at UC Santa Cruz, two major conservative figures in sociology, senior people, were hired in, I think, 1968. Now that's unthinkable later on. Politics played a role, but everyone accepted that there would be a debate. There were various shades of opinion. They all had to be represented. And even scholars who were left of center were involved in hiring people who were right of center because they wanted a vibrant department with all shades of opinion. So when I say it was not political, I mean it was not politicized. It was not a situation where the entire purpose of the department was to promote one political opinion. But yeah, I mean, people use the word golden age, and they always use that disparagingly. But it is true that the years after World War II were a golden age. My personal opinion on this is there's a very good reason for it, which is this: that at the moment, a person who wants to be a university teacher puts in his undergraduate work and then graduate work. And at the end of his graduate work, he switches sides. I mean, instead of being in the classroom, he's at the front of the classroom teaching. But that's his life. He's never gone off the campus. Now, I think what made the economy of the 50s and 60s the golden age was that university teachers had spent 5 or 6 years in the armed forces. They'd seen the real world. When they came back again, they weren't callow youths who had just, spent 10 years of study on a college campus. They had seen the real world. I mean, they had a great deal of personal experience, better personal experience, but it was very real personal experience. When they came back, they were people of real experience, and they were people, I think, much more sound judgment as a result. And I think that's why, when I joined, which was in the 50s, you had a sense of people of, a certain amount of real life wisdom. Mm-hmm. By 1980 to 1990, that force was beginning to vanish, and the chairs of departments by that time were the people who'd never been off campus. So my feeling is there really was a golden age, and there was a real reason for it. That was World War II.
Now, a lot of people are criticizing universities now because of the political composition of the faculty, and pointing out that it's not representative of the broader public. But I mean, why should it be? I mean, it's not representative in other ways, right? I mean, in terms of interests and in terms of, some would say intelligence. Not necessarily agree with that, but I mean, why would we expect, why should we expect it? I mean, look, more seriously, if you see Germany drifting towards Nazism in the 30s, I mean, is that a fair critique of the universities in Germany to say, hey, there's not enough Nazis in there, we need to be more Nazi-like because we got more Nazis out in the public world. I mean, why should we expect the universities to have that, quote, balance that we have in the broader public? I mean, shouldn't the universities be isolated and kind of insulated from the what's going on in the public sphere?
Well, not isolated to this degree. I mean, look, the brand of politics on university campuses right now is a radical left. It's a sect. it's an extreme sect. It has very little basis in the wider public. I mean, the support. I mean, the problem is that the malcontents that constitute the radical left have all migrated to the university, so that there is a different world. I mean, you have a whole bunch of people on university campuses who don't like America, and you have a whole bunch of people who live in America who do like it. So, that's a very unfortunate split. The other thing I should say is this, that we expect university professors to be people of high intelligence, who are really thoughtful, who carry ideas forward to a high level. Now, I'm sorry, but I think the radical leftists do not fit that profile I just enunciated. Right? I mean, radical leftists are stupid people. They're not very bright. They honestly still think that Marxism works. And anyone who's looked at world history and thinks that Marxism still works is a fool. And too many fools are on the campuses where they have, in fact, fled from the real world because their ideas are ridiculed there and they don't work there. And they carry on this fantasy that their ideas are viable. And the only place they can be viable is on a university campus, divorced from the real world, because the real world is very cruel to their ideas.
Well, a lot of people say that the problem with the humanities is the rise of theory. Now I never really understood this because, I mean, we've always had theory. I mean, in literature, there's been all sorts of theories of literary criticism. I think, as you point out, the more worrisome trend is not the rise of theory, but kind of a change in the process, right? Where, instead of having an analytical approach, which might take you to surprising destinations, right? You begin your analysis by starting with your conclusion, which seems antithetical to not only the scientific process, but the process of humanities inquiry, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the radical politics is a conclusion in itself. There's nowhere else to go. It's all, so to the extent you do research, you're doing research that validates your conclusion that you already. Yeah. No, I don't like this word theory for what they do. They cloak themselves in this word theory. Well, they're not theory. I mean, what they do is nothing to do with theory. It is a theory, a very silly theory, which history has given plenty of examples of the fact that this theory, in fact, it doesn't work. But they try to pretend that theorizing is what they do and nobody else does. Well, it's absolute nonsense. This is a lousy theory, a theory that's got holes in it, a theory that makes no sense. I don't want to let them claim sole use of the word theory. You and I are theoreticians in what we do. I mean, we analyze problems and come up with solutions in our various fields, and then produce articles or books explaining how our new insight into those problems works. That's theorizing. These people don't theorize. They parrot a particular viewpoint, which never develops, no matter how many times history knocks it down, their view never develops beyond the initial point they came from.
Well, so is there a connection between this approach, right, this kind of conclusion first approach, and what people claim is a suppression of discussion, debate, and disagreement?
Absolutely, because if you start with a particular point of view, and you will not allow anyone to get beyond that point of view, to criticize it, to undermine it, to explain the pros and cons of it, or to contrast it with other theories of politics. In other words, what you ought to be doing in the project class is say, here's one view, here's another view. Now let's have a look at the advantages and disadvantages of both. see whether how they stack up. When you look at the pros and cons for each one, that's theorizing. That's approaching things analytically. Now, it's the radical left doesn't want that because it can't survive it. And once you talk about the pros and cons of the theory, you have to get into what happened in Russia, what happened in Eastern Europe, what is happening at the moment in China, what is happening in Venezuela, what has been happening in Cuba, versus what has been happening in these years. Of course, the left can't allow discussion. Discussion is lethal for them. They can't survive it.
But look, I mean, you can have all sorts of silliness in English departments, at MLA. I mean, heck, David Lodge was, making fun of what was happening in English departments back in the 70s. I mean, why should we care? I mean, who cares what kind of tweed wearing, readers of Milton have to say about politics? Why? How did they have sort of, how did their ideas get diffused into the broader university and the broader public? I mean, why isn't it sort of contained, right? In the halls of not just academe, but in that subculture within academe? Well,
it'd be precisely because there arose a group of people who were going to use the English department. They set up, they first of all imported lefty scholars on the grounds that they wanted a feminist approach to Shakespeare and a racial approach and so on. And those people agitated for departments of Black studies, departments of feminist studies. And slowly there arose a larger and larger cadre of people on campus in the sociology department. The anthropology has been devastated by this. Politics is slowly one of the last to go, but it has slowly been taken over too. So that basically, the reason we always come back to English is that was the easiest thing to infiltrate and take over and get a foothold on the campus, from which you could then start to branch out into other departments. You have to remember this is a campaign that began in the 60s. It took a long time to develop. I mean, by about the 90s, what we've been speaking about mostly, by about the 90s, they were gaining sufficient strength to have the ability to control appointments. I think probably certainly by the year 2000, the radical left were controlling virtually all appointments, perhaps not in some sense. But the figures actually tell a different story. The figures tell the story, but I mean, the proportion of left-right went from 1970, there was 3 left to 2 right among professors. By 2000, it was 5 to 1, 5 left, 1 right. Now, it was at that point that the floodgates opened. And you can tell that because within 5 years, we've gone from 5 to 1 to 8 to 1. Now, if you do the math, you've got a mathematician on hand, I'm sure, being in business. But if you do the math, you figure that the replacement rate in 5 years, how many faculty have been replaced? Perhaps 30%. Now, if you go from 5 to 1 overall to 8 to 1 overall, and you've only got a 30% replacement ratio, you could see what the score is. Every single time, pretty well, everyone had to be left of center to go from 5 to 1 to 8. So I think the floodgates opened about 2000. After that, I think almost no conservative could be appointed.
Well, but a lot of people would say, so what, right? I mean, the students are smart. They come in and they know how to tell the professors what the professors want to hear. And, you're going to go on and get your job at Goldman Sachs, and you know what you got to do. You got to write the essay, and maybe even have ChatGPT write it for you and then move on. Like, why why should we care? I mean, if you're a parent and you're sending your kid off to a school and, okay, they're going to learn some approach to Shakespeare that is, revolutionary. And the professor who's teaching the class on Shakespeare gets up and talks about how great, Chavez was or whatever. Like, so what? I mean, let them have their fun. We got our certificate and we got our ticket punched into McKinsey. So whatever. Isn't that just kind of okay, it's a waste of resources. It's whatever. But why should we care?
Well, waste of resources, for one thing. I mean, first of all, okay, so let's buy the argument that, let's say, an awful lot of students are smart enough to resist this stuff. Well, not all of them. I mean, let's suppose, best case scenario, 2/3 of students know the professors are talking nonsense. 1/3, that's an awful lot of people, believe in nonsense. But shouldn't we care that our kids don't believe a word their professors say? Why the hell are they there then? I mean, what is the point of a college education if the best you can say for it is the kids get nothing from it because they know the professors are stupid? I mean, in my day, when I started teaching, people would have been appalled at the notion that it's okay because the professors are so stupid that the kids won't believe them. I mean, everyone would have known that meant it's a monumental failure of university education. But in other words, the best case scenario was zero learning on par students. The worst case scenario was that students actually learned something from those professors who were idiots. I mean, none of this is good.
Well, a lot of people would say that university education is just a screening mechanism, right? It's like, when I graduated from school, I went and bought a custom-made suit so I could, look good at the interviews with the bank. I mean, that's also a waste of resources. I mean, my ability to function as a associate at an investment bank, is not affected by the quality of the suit I'm wearing, right? So, well, I mean, that if in fact the university is just about screening and it's saying, oh, this person's willing to put up with 4 years of nonsense, that means they're going to make a great employee, then we shouldn't be worried, right?
We shouldn't be worried that kids waste 4 years and parents waste hundreds of thousands of dollars. God, I'm worried about that. And we could have a much better, more efficient society. Those kids could be spending those 4 years doing something more intelligent. Look, the other thing is, when I started off, a university education was worth having. You could tell. I remember in those days, if I met someone at a party, and I spoke to a stranger, over a drink, I could tell them between someone who had a bachelor's degree and someone who did. It's easy. You could tell a trained mind from one that wasn't. You can't now because that difference doesn't exist anymore. Oh, I mean, university education is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't exist now.
So you're saying that actually the screening isn't even going to work because students aren't really learning how to think. I mean, you highlight how the workload of being a student has declined dramatically, right? You go in and you say what you're expected to say, and then you go and spend your time doing other stuff, right?
I think the only benefit I can think of is that if you get into Harvard, everyone knows it's very difficult to get into Harvard, right? So you then go through life with people knowing that you are one of the brightest 18-year-olds of your generation. And that is a mark of distinction for you. But that's nothing to do with what Harvard did to you.
Well, but doesn't that mean that then people are just going to pay more attention to what you studied, right? So, if you come out of Berkeley with an engineering degree, I mean, that means something a lot different from, say, coming out of Berkeley with an English degree. I mean, I don't know. I don't know enough about the English department at Berkeley to say that. But is that sort of the explanation for why popularity of the humanities has been on the decline? I mean, because students kind of know that they're not really, learning anything? Is that the idea?
No, the numbers in humanities courses now are just appalling. I mean, it used to be that when a first-rate teacher of Shakespeare gave a lecture course, maybe 500 kids want to take the course. At the moment, I mean, humanities course sometimes get 5 or 6 students on a large campus. I mean, there is a real crisis. Everyone knows there's a huge crisis in the humanities. At the moment, for example, on my campus, the engineering faculty, which is mainly focused on computer engineering, not exclusively, but it has some huge proportion of undergraduates and graduate students too. I forget the exact numbers, but something like a third of the campus. But they have nothing like a third of the number of professors. And there's a constant complaint that these humanities professors preaching Marxism preach that to tiny classes. And there are far more professors still in those areas than are needed by according to the numbers. But the campuses are reluctant to change because they are run by leftists. And the leftists aren't about to abolish jobs for leftists. It's as simple as that. So the poor engineering faculty are overflowing classrooms and a terrible time trying to, deploy enough faculty time to teach all the kids they have. But they have this problem that the campus administrations are very protective of the humanities people because the university is very much in the grip of radical leftism.
No, like if you went back and interviewed Ellen Bloom in 1987, or even, John Ellis in the late 90s, and you said, hey, how concerned are you about these trends kind of infiltrating medicine or engineering? I don't think you would have been too worried. But in this latest book, I mean, you highlight that we now have whatever, PC medicine or, PC engineering, right? Now, how did that happen?
Well, I mean, just the weight of numbers. When you have the campus completely dominated by one political ideology, it's going to start to infiltrate into everything sooner or later. At the moment, I mean,
But I mean, what does it mean to have politicized engineering? I mean, it would seem relatively easy to keep politics out of engineering or out of medicine.
well, it's not. I mean, medicine is going really. I mean, the large numbers. I mean, look at it in terms of hours spent on actually the real subject matter of medicine. Now you have first-year students with a lot of hours spent on woke topics, on how to not be a racist doctor, or how to be politically correct, and so on. So you have, best case, you have lots of hours wasted now. But you also have, the American Medical Association has gone far left. You have real problems with now the question of merit versus the question of checking boxes, skin color, sexuality, and so on. You have now real doubts sown in the minds of the public as to whether they're getting well-trained people because they see someone who's managing to tick the appropriate boxes. They wonder whether they're as well trained. I mean, this is very bad news. There are a lot of very brilliant people among humanities, and I feel sorry for them because, in fact, no matter how good they are, subject to the suspicion of, well, maybe they're one of the ones who were let through, shouldn't have been let through. There was plenty of signs that the whole of the academy now, science, the STEM fields, is under assault by woke ideology. There are certainly inroads being made. How serious they are is a matter of dispute. How far they will be able to go is a matter of dispute. But the fact is that there is definitely an assault on the idea of objectivity in sciences and engineering. I mean, you've heard about black mathematics and so on, which is a nonsense idea. Mathematics doesn't have any color to it. My favorite saying is, only an engineer can build a bridge that will stand up. It'll only just stand up. I mean, anyone can build a bridge that is, overbuilt. But these standards are very seriously under assault now. No one quite knows how far they'll go. Certainly, there's some good work still being done in the sciences and STEM fields, no question about that. But the radical left is very hostile to the idea of merit. And no one knows how far it will be able to take that hostility.
Well, now what's new though? I mean, look, the Western tradition is full of critiques of the Western tradition, right? I mean, it's almost like what makes the Western tradition, right, unique. I mean, that's what makes it so fascinating, is that, within it, you have people criticizing all the people that came before. Why isn't this just a continuation of that narrative?
Because it's an attack on that Western tradition. I mean, in other words, what you're pointing to is the way the Western tradition constantly develops, because it's constantly questioning itself, constantly trying to find better ways of doing things. Engineering has developed hugely. In my lifetime, medicine is unrecognized. In my childhood, people were scared stiff of scarlet fever and diphtheria. They were lethal to young children. Shortly before I was born, diabetes was fatal. The West institution is constantly changing, constantly upgrading, constantly. The point is, the radical left wants to stop that dead. It wants to focus on one idea, Marxism, and everyone knows that once you do that, development stops. As in China, President Xi turns out to be an orthodox communist. He's almost stopping the development of industry, single-handedly because of that. What's anti-Western about that leftism is precisely that it wants to put the brakes on everything and say, we have found the truth, and there's no one is going to be allowed to go beyond our truth.
So, in the book, the breakdown book, you talk about all these different kind of checks and balances that the university had in place, right, to kind of make sure that inquiry could continue. So why did these break down in your view?
They were infiltrated by leftists. I mean, as the buildup of radical leftism among faculty, the key watchdog committees became staffed by those people. So
what about, trustees, these are usually wealthy donors. And if you're a wealthy donor, why would you be sort of part of this cabal?
Well, the problem is that, different universities handle this different ways. The University of California certainly has been, in my lifetime, has been appointing members to the Board of Regents who were successful, self-made businessmen. So the typical, one very typical profile is someone who started a business, was wildly successful, became a multi-millionaire, And then the University of California approaches that person and puts him on the Board of Regents. The governor, technically, governor appoints and the Senate confirms, but my suspicion is that the university, in fact, is providing suggestion. I think that's happening. So what happens then is that a sign of having made it for those people is that they become regents. It's a very prestigious position. And they appreciate their new status as, socially, now a senior member of the state of California, a person that really matters, has really made it big time. And that's not the state of mind of someone who's going to question what the university is doing. They're likely, and experience shows that this is what mainly has been happening. They're grateful to the university for having given them this added status, and they tend to be protective of the university. They're supposed to be watchdogs on behalf of the public. They're supposed to represent the public interest and to keep the university honest. But their psychology is, I've made it big, and as a result of being given this exalted rank of regents of the state, of the great state university. And that's not a frame of mind in which you want to go. I mean, I'm simply describing what has happened now. It so happens that at the moment, there are a couple of regents that are rocking the boat, and thank God for that. But over my lifetime, over the 50 years I've been, 56 years I've been involved with the university, that's not been a common situation.
So are you saying the boards of regents and boards of trustees are effectively captured by the administration of the universities?
I would say the last 20, 30 years, that's certainly the case. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The prevailing atmosphere among the faculty of, very strong leftism has certainly been accepted by boards of regents. Whether that's because those regents have been in part recruited with the idea in mind that they would be faithful to that idea, or whether they're simply intimidated by the university. I mean, it's not easy for a person who's outside the university to come in and challenge these, what they think of as very brilliant people. But whether there's a deliberate atmosphere of seeking out regents that will be congenial to the university in its present state or not, I just don't know. What I know is that the number of people who have been prepared to rock the boat and just say the university is not well, it's not doing it, that there are things about it that are frankly sick. That show a dysfunctional university. The number of regents willing to stick their necks out and say that is very small. One of them about something like 20, 30 years ago was John Moores, who was a member of the Jimmy Carter Center. So solid Democratic Party credentials. But John Moores started to ask questions about affirmative action, how far the university was bending the rules, how far they were reaching down into very poorly qualified students in order to get more grad students. And when John Moores started to ask those questions, his fellow regents turned on him and censured him, their own chairman. And John Moores soon retired from the regents in disgust. So that was a horrible warning to a regent that asked, inconvenient questions. But I think that the current situation, I'm more optimistic.
So it's similar to the kind of board capture that we see in private companies, except that we don't have kind of shareholders to kind of serve as a check on that. Yeah.
the congressional hearing with those three presidents of major universities, MIT, Harvard, Penn. Those people appointed by such committees usually dominated by the Board of Trustees or the Board of Regents. And you can see the results are that the people appointed were very congenial to the radicals who ran the university. I mean, basically, if you look at the outlook, on political life, the Harvard Board of Overseers, no, the Overseers is the larger group, the corporation. If you look at the outlook of those people, compare it to the outlook of the faculty, they're identical. So they hired a president who had almost no credentials whatsoever. I mean, he was just very, very thin. 11 articles, it barely gets you tenure to make the university. And they were plagiarized, they were derivative. Even if you took seriously the fact that she wrote them, they were trivial compared to the serious research of people, major scholars who come out with major breakthroughs in scientific understanding or whatever. So I would say that those hearings proved that the appointment process for those three presidents had been completely taken over by left radicals. And yet, in theory, was dominated by the Board of Trustees or Regents.
Well, some would argue that the qualifications for administrators and the qualifications for faculty are very different. And I've heard people bemoan the kind of expansion of the administrative classes, right, in the universities. But if what you're saying is true, then it shouldn't really matter, because even if the universities were run by faculty, you would get the same results.
Why being run by faculty?
Well, the faculty usually have some say in governance, particularly in, say, UC, but a lot of people say that the administrators serve as the mechanism for the propagation and enforcement of these policies.
Reverse. The faculty have the administration in their grip. If the administrators know they serve at the pleasure of the radical faculty. Remember what happened to Larry Summers at Harvard? Larry Summers said that it was possible that women had different interests to men and perhaps different abilities in science, in mathematics, for example, which I think there's kind of evidence for, but he only put it forward as a possibility. He was run out of the presidency immediately by a clamor from the radical faculty. The situation when I first started at University of California was that the most illustrious faculty, maybe 30, 40 faculty members on the campus who had the most brilliant careers, who were well known, internationally as great scholars. They were the trendsetters. And the president of the university knew that if he upset those people, he was out. So to that extent, the greatest scholars in the 60s, early 60s, were a constituency that the administration answered. Now, slowly that changed. And we're now at the point where the radical faculty of the constituency, the radical faculty long ago took over the committees, the committees that were most influential on campus life. And those committees oversee the appointment of administrators. Almost all administrators are actually the agents of the radical faculty. The faculty are dominating things. When I hear my colleagues, conservatives, say that we should got rid of the DEI administrators, if we got in better administrators, things would change. No, they wouldn't change because it's the solid phalanx that dominates the campus. And everyone in that administration knows that the minute they cross those people, they're gone.
Well, most of the faculty I know are pretty darn busy doing research. they really don't have any time or interest in governance issues, and they don't really pay a lot of attention to it. And I think this might explain why we fail to see really much resistance from faculty with these diversity statements, right? That all UC Berkeley faculty are required to submit for their jobs. And this contrasts with what happened in the 50s, right? Where at least I don't know the history accurately enough to know, perhaps you do, but it seems at least that there's a narrative around the loyalty pledges at UC where the faculty, at least a significant chunk of the faculty, put up a fight and resisted this. But you don't see any resistance to this similar sort of pledge. Why is that? I mean, is it just because the faculty are, just too busy trying to get promoted so that they can't be bothered with this? Or is it that the application is different, right? So it's primarily for new faculty and doesn't really interfere that much with the tenured faculty and their day-to-day life?
Well, it's begun to interfere with the existing faculty because promotions now depend on DEI statements as well. No, I think the difference is the loyalty oath was imposed from the outset. I mean, the loyalty oath came from politicians to the president of the university. The president of the university was Clark Kerr. He imposed that loyalty oath. And yes, I mean, dozens of faculty objected vehemently, and they objected with their feet. I mean, one of my greatest friends was there at the time, and he took off. He gave up his Berkeley job and went to the University of Chicago. He was one of many that did that. But a lot of people did not want to be part of the university that gave a loyalty oath, a political loyalty oath. And pretty soon, the loyalty oath was dropped because Berkeley was losing a lot of brilliant people.
Well, we don't see a lot of faculty leaving the UC system because of the DEI statement.
Because in the 60s, 50s and 60s, the loyalty oath was not adopted. So if you didn't like it in Berkeley, you could go to Chicago. Now, I mean, if you don't like DEI at Berkeley, there are very few people go, we shouldn't do any better. I mean, the reach of the radical faculty, its grip on American academia is extensive. It is pervasive. It is everywhere. And one of the things that I found it very hard to understand is the fact that what was happening on one campus was replicated on almost every other campus. And yet it seemed so, irrational to me. And yet the whole country, the universities in the whole country were exhibiting the same kind of irrationality. And I still marvel at this, that there weren't more holdouts. But no, the DEI thing is a reflection of the values of the radical faculty. So in other words, it is not coming from Clark Kerr, as it did in the 50s. It is coming from a solid phalanx of faculty, the predominant faculty group. Object to it. You're going to object to the values of most people. And the people who do it, I mean, stand out. I mean, for example, how many people objected to DEI in mathematics? There was the professor at Davis, her name escapes me now. But what was extraordinary about that protest by that particular professor was that she was one. I mean, she was well known for being very objective to,
Well, I just learned that these statements are not actually required by the UC system, and it's up to the discretion of the department chair. Most department chairs, I don't think they knew that, but turns out that it's up to them. Now we'll see whether or not that leads to fewer statements. See whether or not it leads to department chairs abandoning it. But look, I mean, at the end of the book, you talk about, well, what can be done here? I mean, do you think that this demographic group is just going to age out, right? All the folks that got their jobs in the 70s they're going to be retiring soon, and this whole thing will go away, or is the institutional architecture so rigid at this point that it's going to be difficult to see it move back towards more open inquiry?
Well, the universities themselves won't change. I mean, they are, at the moment, people buy a sect, a minority sect, political sect, that is extraordinarily tenacious, extraordinarily unwilling to compromise, extraordinarily intolerant and intemperate. And they will go on appointing people like themselves. And we're still seeing the grip, and this is what I'm going to say. The grip of the radical left is growing ever tighter, day by day. People don't seem to grasp this, but it is true. I know of half a dozen people in California, various institutions, senior scholars or conservatives, brilliant scholars with great scholarly reputations, who are being harassed into early retirement. And they are getting so sick of it that they are indeed taking early retirement. So very famous names. I won't name them because my friends, and I don't have their permission to the public. But I can count at least half a dozen, because those people will be replaced by people who continue to the prevailing political opinion on campus. So that you are getting a slow concentration. Even now, the concentration is strengthening. And the rule of thumb is that the more you get a group of people in one room that agree with each other, the more you ban from that room any contrary opinion, the more those people will descend into stupidity, because there's nothing to check them. What keeps people like you and me alive intellectually is that if we say something that has a flaw in it, someone is going to descend those, spot the flaw. And in a thriving university, there are enough bright people around you that if you say something with a weakness in it, there'll be someone who'll point it out to you, and you'll be better off. Because now, when you have a group of people that all agree with each other, that discipline, that self-correction is gone. And so you'll descend into greater and greater irrationality and stupidity. And that process is still ongoing. Now, so I don't see any change in the universities. They will continue to appoint people like themselves. There's just about enough people. I mean, the professoriate as a proportion of the total population of the United States, they can just about keep going, getting people like themselves. So I think the only way in which change will come is from the outside. It's either going to come from people who finally realizing that this is not the kind of thing that we used to have. It is not worth 4 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. That their kids can do better than this. As there is some evidence that that's happening. In between 2011, 2019, the population, higher education students, dropped from 20 million to 18 million. During those years, the population of the 18 to 24 cohort stayed about the same. It peaked during that time period. It peaked 2013, 2014. So it rose from 2011 up to 2014, then started to drop. By 2019, it was about where it started. So there's no factor of the population aging involved here. 2 million people are missing by 2019. So the public is starting to get a sense that this is not worth what it was. After 2019, unfortunately, the figures, the people who keep the records changed the way they counted, and it's now much more difficult to compare numbers now with numbers then. You've also got the problem with illegals, and you've got the problem with foreign students. There's a huge increase in foreign students. So it's getting much more difficult to say what enrollment trends are. My belief is that they will continue to drop, because I think that, especially after this latest couple of months, the public watching the anti-Semitism on the campuses. I think public dissatisfaction with the campuses is going up. So my guess is that over time, you're going to get population that goes to college dropping, and that will eventually lead to some kind of change. But how long it'll take and what form it will take, I don't know. The other possibility is action by state legislatures. You've already got action in Florida, North Carolina, Texas. Legislatures looking at campuses and saying, we're not going to let you do certain things. They're not allowing you to do DEI. In the case of Florida, there's even a more or less takeover of one educational institution by a new board of trustees appointed more or less by the legislature. And so you're going to have a different kind of academic institution. You've got ones in Austin, University of Austin, started by reformers. So new institutions will be springing up. Old ones will be going broke and folding. As it is, I mean, about, I think, 80 mostly minor institutions have been bust in the last 5 to 10 years. But this is all very iffy, because awful lot of parents think they want to give their kids this chance they can in life, and the best chance they can give them has always been college education. And that instinct is not going to go away anytime soon. So I'm hopeful for some change.
Well, now, a lot of people would say that what's happening in Florida is political interference with the mission of the university, right? It's overruling faculty governance. I mean, you have politicians, right? Very, very directly imposing their view of the university on the administrators and faculty. So, I mean, isn't that institutionally the concern that we have about politics in education?
Well, what you've really got, I think, is better described as a legislature deciding that the universities, having been given the mandate of educating, pursuing higher education, have abandoned that and substituted for it radical politics. And so I think it's better described as the legislature intervening to stop the politicizing of the universities. Now, obviously the other side is going to see it as political interference. But that's a bit rich coming from people who work at the universities into factories for the propagation of radical politics.
Now, you said there has to be some place in society where people can explore the humanities, right, and ask questions about literature and life. If it's not the universities, where is it? And since kind of the humanities got this whole thing started, will it be the humanities that kind of offer up the corrective at some point?
Well, because the humanities is dwindling. I mean, look, students are smart enough to know that the average humanities course now is a pain in the neck and not worth anything. So numbers have, I mean, if you compare the number of English majors in the 60s to the number of English majors now, it's a shocking drop. I forget the numbers, but already by 1990, those numbers have been halved. They're now much less.
I mean, does that mean that we as a society are less interested in things like literature, or have we just sort of moved it outside of the academy?
And that's right. I think we've moved outside the academy. No, I mean, I think there's still as much interest in Shakespeare as ever, but it takes place outside. It takes place in the columns of newspapers and magazines, in reviews of performances. It takes place in people going to performances. It takes place in people reading those books, but it does not take place in college campuses in the way it used to. I mean, when I say the enrollment in humanities courses has dropped like a stone, I don't mean that interest in the humanities dropped, far from it. I mean, I think we're still just as interested in history. If you go on TV or on the web, the interest in World War II, for example, and movies and documentaries, books being produced, still as great as ever. But if you look in the average college calendar, I mean, in the catalog of courses, you will look in vain for a course on World War II. It's hard to believe that the greatest, I mean, the Trojan War of our modern era was World War II, the greatest conflict in the history of the human race. And it happened to be a conflict in which there was good and evil, which most wars are not like that. They're mistaken. They're combatants who really don't know what they're up to. Met so many. World War I certainly was a huge conflict where people getting into it didn't know what they were getting into. But in World War II, people did know what they were getting into, and they were. It was good versus evil. It was a monumental triumph of civilization. And if you look through the history courses on the Berkeley Hills, you won't find the World War II in any of these. Staggering thought. I mean, and likewise, the crucial development of the fall of the Soviet Union, one of the great events of world history. Oh boy, that is not for the history departments. That's not what they want to. That's not what they want the kids to know. They want that. They don't want the kids to know that with central control by government, you have shops with empty shelves, no food on them, and you have potatoes rotting in the fields. I mean, they don't want kids to understand that's what communism brings. You know, there's a whole lot of stuff that people are very interested in, judging by the sales of books, judging by documentaries on the TV and on the web. And those things are of no interest whatsoever.
Well, last question. You know, you're a scholar of German literature, but you know, you're not German, right? And I think you said at some point that a good kind of department that studies German literature needs Germans and non-Germans, right? Can you apply that same philosophy across other departments, right? What is that a way to think about kind of diversity with respect to approaches to a topic?
Absolutely. I mean, look, at the moment you have we'll take my department, but any department, it's the same. The Department of Politics, right? Now, what do you want in the Department of Politics? You want kids exposed to libertarians, conservatives, different kinds of conservatives. You want to Republican, classical liberals. You want to exposed to eco types. And so you want a department that's got strong voices, all these kinds, including socialists. But you can't leave them out. They're important for the education of kids. Now, what do you actually have on average company? you have the entire department composed of leftists, not centrists either. I mean, mostly they're radical leftists. They won't hire conservatives. They won't hire libertarians. They won't hire classical liberals. So the kids get one shade of political opinion filter. If I had my way, I would have the Committee on Educational Policy come in and say, this is an incompetent department. We're taking away its license to give PhDs and bachelor's degrees in politics. Until it can prove to us that it's competent to offer those degrees, and competence means a range of opinion that does justice to the field. Until that happens, they may not offer those degrees. Now, if you went into the average politics department and said that, you'd be lynched. You wouldn't survive.
Well, I can attest to the fact that finance departments will hire just wealthy people and not so wealthy people. That's how I got my job. Well, John, thanks so much for joining me. The latest book is called The Breakdown of Higher Education. But don't forget these oldies but goodies against deconstruction and literature lost. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're done. Well, I was at a meeting recently. We had this thing called this free speech thing that we just created here at Berkeley, and I went to the meeting, and there were about 40 faculty members at this meeting last week. It was pretty good, and that's where I learned that the diversity statement is not required because the
Berkeley campus has been gem. When I first joined the University of California, I looked up to the Berkeley campus as the great center of the university. It's so sad what happened.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, I'm in the business school, and so we my colleague contacted the dean and said, "Hey, you know what? We don't have to do these statements." And the dean was like, "Well, we're going to do them anyway." So, anyway, that's how it goes.
Well,
All right.
Aaron Wildowski.
Yeah.
Well, he was a great friend of mine. He set up a unit called, I think, the Center for Public Policy. And he said that they were always going to have an equal number of left of center faculty and right of center faculty. That was what would make it a great enterprise.
Right.
Aaron died of cancer when he was 63. That policy changed. Only leftists were hired after that.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I think same in Kennedy School and Wilson School. You see that that trend happening as well. Law schools too. I mean, it's hard to find someone in a law school that's I mean, we've got John Yoo at Berkeley, but I mean, people were parked down on his front lawn. I mean, for years, protesting and stuff at his house.
He was a good friend of mine.
Yeah, so
He was a good friend of Jesse Chopa.
yeah. Done. Okay, well, John, thanks so much. Hopefully the sound will be good.
Thanks so much for having me. It's much fun, and keep up the good work. Do these podcasts. It's great.
Okay, I'll let you know when it's up. Talk soon. Bye.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.